My name is Becky Szarzynski. I'm from the southern part of the Shenandoah Valley, so about 2 hours west of here. My father, Glenn, and I own and operate Mountain Glen Farm. It's a 300 to 350 acre-ish farm where we manage our grasslands utilizing the South Pole cattle breed. And to give you just a quick background on me real fast before I delve into the soil health regime of today's discussion, essentially about 15 years ago, we made a big pivoting moment in our farm. We were doing very slow rotations. Well, let me back up. We had about 20 head of cattle. They were just run-of-the-mill Angus. We had about 110 open acres. I decided to go to college, then I decided to drop out and come home to be a farmer. And so then when I did that, I told my parents that I was interested in farming and I wanted to take it more seriously and have that as my livelihood, my living. And so we started to research farming, and at that time, sustainable agriculture was the hot topic. And that was really jiving with me at that point in life. And so I said, I want to be a sustainable farmer, whatever that meant. That's what I wanted to do. And so at that point, we were researching cattle breeds, and we came across the South Pole. And we actually went to a 2-day workshop that Greg Judy was giving a talk at. Back then, nobody knew who he was. And he was talking about regenerative farming, he was talking about rotational grazing, he was talking about South Pole cows, and so that kind of all jived with us. And so at that point in our farm history, we essentially started to divide our farms up a little more so that we could do more intensive rotational grazing. So we were doing 2-week rotations, and we then transitioned to daily rotations. We were doing hormone implants on our calves. We were doing spraying. We had the fly control in our mineral. We were using chemical fertilizer, all these things that we were using on the farm. And so we kind of all took a step back from all that. At the same time, we decided to transition to South Pole breed and bought our first bull and just crossed it with everything that we already had. So we had just run-of-the-mill Angus, crossed it with a South Pole bull, and utilized the breed up program that the South Pole Association offers its members today, and Dakota and Dave will talk more about that later on. So that's how we kind of got started. And at that time, I started seeing a transition happening on the land during that time as well. We were starting to get more plant diversity. It seemed like our cattle were just performing better. So we were seeing a lot of great things, and that really led me down the path of soil health. Now, soil health is definitely a lot more in the limelight now than it was just even 5 or 10 years ago, which I'm glad it is, because it's a really, really important topic. I think all of us here who are interested in South Pole breed are also interested in grasslands and therefore directly interested in soil health. And so let's talk about soil health. First of all, let's define what soil health is. So I'm going to ask you guys to raise your hand if you would like to donate your answer of what you think soil health is. What do you think soil health is to you?
Productive.
Soil health is productive? So good soil health is productive. Okay, I'll take that. Regenerative, so it regenerates itself. It doesn't just maintain, it gets a little better every time. Okay. Living. Soil health is living. Yep, I like all these answers.
A functioning nutrient cycle.
A functioning nutrient cycle. I like that one a lot. That one's really good. Anybody else? Okay.
It soaks up the rain.
It soaks up the rain. So it has infiltration capacity, and it doesn't just wash off, but it actually soaks it up.
Good mineral cycle.
Good mineral cycle. Yep. I think these are all really good. These are all really good. Any others?
Full of earthworms.
Full of earthworms. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, full of bugs.
Full of
All
bugs.
kinds of bugs.
Full of microorganisms, all that good stuff.
The lifeblood of the multi-species community.
Lifeblood of the multi-species community. These are all really, really good. The thing is with soil health, I don't think there actually is a definition. So for us, I think all those would be perfect. For me, my very, very simplified version of soil health is kind of what you were saying, functioning soil that can function. If you don't have functioning soil, you essentially have dead dirt. So, and you can have that too, but I prefer to have soil. So soil health is very complex. It's very simple at the same time. I'm not an expert by any means, even though sometimes I'm like, well, if a farmer's not an expert at soil, then who is? So really, I think we're all pretty much experts when it comes to soil. It's just getting it to be a little more understanding of it. So let's kind of paint this picture here real fast of what functioning soil is, or a good picture in our heads. So for you to have soil, you have to have a living plant. If you have no living plants, again, you have dirt. You don't have soil. And a lot of soils have inherent properties with them. So over here where we're at in Bent Creek, you probably have more clay soils. So where I'm at, I have clay over the Shenandoah Valley, but it's more loamy. You could also be maybe near the coast where it's a little more sandy. So some of these properties are, you have what you have. You can't do much about changing that. That's what you have. But you can improve it, and you can get soil life and incorporate organic matter, and you can make it productive. But usually those properties are what they are. So those are more of the physical properties. And then we also have the biological properties of soil. And that's really where I think all the magic happens. And so for us to have soil life, the biology of the soil, we have to have plants. So pretend I'm a little plant. I'm like a little grass plant. And I've got my little solar panels out, my little leaves. So what do plants do with, what do? They photosynthesize. So they take CO2 from the air, they take sunlight, they take water, and essentially they are taking carbon in its gaseous state and transforming it in their little bodies using sunlight and water and transforming it into liquid carbon. And what they do with this is they usually use it to grow. Plants are growing. They use it to function. They use it to grow roots down in the soil. And so they use this liquid carbon, these carbohydrates, these sugars, these proteins, these lipids, everything that they're making in their little bodies to grow and flourish and make new tillers and all that good stuff. What they're also doing is they're taking a pretty large percent of it, some plants up to 50%, maybe sometimes even more, of this liquid carbon that they're making in their little plant bodies. And they're actually pushing it down through their roots and out into the soil. So they call that exuding. They're exuding this liquid carbon into the soil. And some of it, like I said, 50%, that's a lot. That's a lot of energy these plants are putting towards producing exudates in the soil, and they do this for a reason. They don't just do it because they feel like it, obviously. And one of the reasons, the main reason why they do this, is because this is the exchange of their liquid carbon, their sugars, for other things in the soil by utilizing soil biology. So when they push these sugars down into the roots and exude them out to the soil, there's the area immediately around the roots, which is called the rhizosphere. So the area right around the roots. This is where a lot of this magic is happening, essentially. So this is where the biology in the soil and the plant kind of come together. When we talk about soil life, I'm just going to be very simplistic about it because, again, I'm not a scientist, but I know enough just to be dangerous, as a lot of people say. So there's when I talk about soil life, I'm talking about the bacteria in the soil. I'm talking about the fungus in the soil. When we talk about soil health, a lot of people talk about like the mycorrhizal fungi. That's just one type of fungus. There's actually lots of other types of fungus in the soil as well. There's protozoa, there's nematodes, and then there's, beetles, mites, earthworms, dung beetles, all kinds of good stuff. So from micro to macro, there's all kinds of stuff in the soil. And when I'm being very simplistic, there's trillions upon trillions of these things in the soil, even just in a teaspoon. I think we've all heard that in a teaspoon of soil, there's, some ridiculous amount, trillions upon trillions of living life forms. So there's a lot going on. And so essentially when these plants exude this liquid sugar, liquid carbon down into the soil, they are feeding the microbes in the soil. So in exchange for the plant liquid carbon, the mycorrhizal fungi will sometimes form a symbiotic relationship with those roots. And in exchange for the liquid carbon, the plant might say, oh, I need nitrogen or I need phosphorus. And the mycorrhizal fungi will go out into the soil and find what that plant needs and bring it back in exchange for the liquid carbon. So it's a nice symbiotic relationship. Some of the relationships are not symbiotic. Sometimes it's just the birthing and dying and eating and defecating of these little creatures in the soil that make plant available nutrients right there at the root rhizosphere for the plants. So there's this whole world going on right below. Again, I'm simplifying it very, very much. But by doing this interaction between the plant and the soil biology, there's also a lot of other great things going on. So we're also building soil at this current time. So as the plant is putting its liquid carbon into the soil, that's essentially, so it's taking CO2 from the air, from the gaseous state, putting it into liquid carbon, and then exuding it into the soil and making, helping make organic matter. So it's bringing it from gaseous liquid to a stable solid state in the soil. So we're making soil by doing this process. And you cannot have this process, you can't have this carbon cycle happen, this pathway, this channel, unless you have the biology in the soil as well. So does everyone kind of get a little bit of what I'm saying so far? I feel like this isn't common knowledge, but it's a lot of good stuff going on. And so this is essentially what I feel like a lot of us are trying to get at, because without this cycle with the plant and the relationship with the soil life, soil will not be produced and soil will deteriorate and go backwards. So you need this constant carbon cycling to happen. And plus, as we know, if you get too much carbon in the wrong places, it can be bad, just like with anything. So if we get too much carbon in the air, it can be bad, but if we put it back into the soil where it can do good and create organic matter, it's a good thing. So that's kind of like the very simplest gist of it. And I know Marv wanted me to touch on a little bit about how chemical fertilizers and fungicides, pesticides, any type of biocide, how that affects soil health, especially the biology of the soil. So let's just say we got our plants out there, we've got a beautiful field, and all of our plants are doing their little plant thing, photosynthesizing and pumping carbon into the soil, and the soil life is having its little party and doing its soil life thing, reproducing and dying and eating and whatever. So our soils are functioning, they're growing, they're building. Let's say Joe Farmer goes out, sorry if your name is Joe. Joe Farmer goes out and says, well, I went to a class and they told me that I needed to put down 50 pounds of nitrogen fertilizer for winter stockpiling purposes. So Farmer Joe goes out and buys a bunch of nitrogen fertilizer, which I don't know what the price is right now with nitrogen fertilizer. I'm sure it's still pretty high. Does anyone know what the price is? Has it come down a little bit from last year? Does anyone use nitrogen fertilizer? Probably not. We don't know. So he goes out, puts it out in his field. So let's walk a little bit through what happens when Joe Farmer does that. In a couple weeks, he might go out to the field and be like, oh, wow, look, I've got this dark, lush, dark green grass. The grass is growing. Things are going good. What they taught me at the class is happening. I'm going to have a lot of good stuff for my cattle to graze this winter. Okay, that's good. However, there's some other things that are going on that we didn't see. So first of all, when we start taking it upon ourselves as farmers to go out and bring an input into the farm, which for me, I'm always trying to be as low input as possible. If there's a natural cycle or we're doing something and I can help bolster and promote that, that's what I'm going to do. I don't need to go out and buy very expensive stuff to try to replace that process. So he puts fertilizer out and starts essentially you're spoon feeding your plant nitrogen. And when you start spoon feeding your plant nitrogen, that plant is going to stop, essentially it's going to stop exudating any type of sugars down into the soil because they no longer need that soil biology to bring them that nitrogen that they were getting through that symbiotic relationship. So therefore the plant's like, well, I don't need the soil life to bring me my nutrients anymore. Joe Farmer's bringing me my nutrients much easier. So why am I going to expend all this energy into exuding my sugars? So they stop doing that. When plants stop exuding sugars, essentially the soil life kind of dries up because they don't have a feed source anymore. And when that dries up, the carbon cycle kind of stops. And when that stops, you're essentially not putting carbon back into the soil. You're not creating organic matter anymore. You're not building soil anymore. So your soil starts to deteriorate. So it starts to harden. It starts to compact. Even if you didn't have any cows or if you didn't have any equipment on your field, if you don't have this carbon cycling building your soils, they're essentially deteriorating. So you're still going to get a hardening of the soil, which affects the infiltration, which now you can't take in any rainwater. So we all know what that means. When a drought comes, you're just out of luck. So that's one thing that can happen if you probably, and I'm saying if you do this once, that's probably not going to happen too much. But if you do it year after year after year, you're kind of messing up with the natural cycles, and you're not helping the soil biology at all. You're breaking up that relationship with the plant and the soil biology. And another kind of detrimental thing with the chemical nitrogen is that it's in a nitrite form. And so when the plant takes that up, they actually try to bind it with carbon, and they make incomplete proteins. They call them funny proteins. And so when your livestock come in and eat that, they essentially can get laminitis, mastitis, liver problems. They can start having some issues, some health issues. So again, if they eat a little bit, I'm sure it's fine, but if they consume too much, you can start having issues, and they are seeing that these days. So let's go the other direction. Say Joe Farmer did not put nitrogen on the pasture, and you're letting Mother Nature kind of just do that cycle for herself. What does that look like? Well, because the plant has formed relationships with the soil biology, there's bacteria in the soil that are just fixing nitrogen from the air. The air is 78% nitrogen, so it's readily available. It's free to us if we just let our bacteria harvest it. So when the plant needs nitrogen, it exchanges this liquid carbon for the nitrogen that the bacteria will give it, or the fungus. And I know we think a lot of legume plants are a big proponent of that. Legumes actually don't fix nitrogen. It's the bacteria related and associated with those legume plants that are fixing the nitrogen. And there's other bacteria that are not relations to just the legumes that fix nitrogen. So there's other bacteria out there that do that as well. And so when the plant gets a organic form of nitrogen from the bacteria in the soil, it can form a complete protein within that plant because it's in the ammonia form. So livestock eat that. It's much, much healthier, a lot less health problems with our livestock, and it's a lot cheaper for the farmer. So in all, when we start using chemical fertilizers, I was using nitrogen as an example, but a lot of chemical fertilizers kind of have the same detrimental effect on the plant to soil life relationship, and so we just need to be mindful of that. I'm going to try to stay neutral in most of the stuff I say. If it works for you, great. If you want to use it sometimes, do what you got to do. There's all kinds of different ways to farm. I'm not going to say which is right or wrong. I'm just telling you what research I've done and kind of what I believe at this point in my life. So if we can nurture the cycles and processes that are already happening, for me, that seems to make the most economical sense, because I'm looking at everything I do on the farm, both economically and ecologically. So I want it to improve both of those things. So let's transition a little bit over to the pesticide, insecticide, herbicide, fungicide, biocide side. Essentially, all those things have a purpose to essentially kill something, whatever that is, whether it's a plant, a bug, fungus, whatever it is, it's there to kill something. So on our farm, I'm not a fan of using these types of chemicals, but we do use them on a very focused and pinpointed aspect. We might spot spray if we have a really bad weed problem in a specific area. Usually it's not me doing it. Usually I make my dad do it because I don't want to touch the stuff. But again, I'm not going to say that it's right or wrong. It's got a purpose, and it can be used as a tool. But I think for us here in America, we've gotten really used to using it as a cheap way out. instead of using our minds to try to think around this and trying to use the natural cycles we have, we're just like, well, A plus B equals this result, so I'm just going to do A plus B so I can get this result, versus let's try to manage things a little differently with our animals or with our crop rotations or with no-till or cover crops or something like that. So I feel like we've gotten a little lazy, and so it's a recipe. It's a prescription that we can use. So that's why we've kind of overdone that kind of stuff, I believe. But so, as we all know, these things are out there to kill something, and by using the fly control mineral, if it works for you, great. But it does have, one thing I wanted to talk about were dung beetles, because that's kind of a new thing that I've recently really started to enjoy, are the dung beetles. How much time do I have left, Marv?
Keep rolling.
Okay, I'm just gonna keep rolling. So, dung beetles are really fascinating to me. I'm sure everybody knows what dung beetles are, right? I think so. Yeah, dung beetles. I've got some here in the jar. I'll pass this around. I actually collected these guys yesterday, and then I dropped them this morning, so they've had a traumatic morning, unfortunately. But I had to switch containers because their feed source in there got all over the place. So in this jar, I think I have 7 different species of dung beetle, and I collected these guys out of 2 pats last night. There's some tunnelers in there, and there's some dwellers in there, and I'll go over that a little bit. There's big ones, and there's the biggest one's probably like the size of my pinky tip, and then the littlest one is like the speck or dot of like a pencil point. So pretty small. You might have to really search in there for that. I'm gonna pass this around if you guys will be gentle with my dung beetles. But take a look at them. So dung beetles. And Marv, you can have these after. And we'll just release them. And you can have these things. So there's 3 types of dung beetles. There's tunnelers, dwellers, and rollers. I have yet to see any rollers. Has anyone seen any rollers? You have?
I have rollers. I was so excited to see them.
Where are you at?
Yeah, I'm right in Farmville,
Oh.
like 15 minutes away. And Mark has cows on my pasture.
Awesome.
But I found them in my dog poop.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, dung beetles are like species specific. So certain dung species like certain types of dung from like certain animals. So if you had the rollers, then they probably were dog specific rollers, I guess. That's
But
really interesting.
I will mention when I treat my dogs with the flea and tick medicine,
Mm-hmm.
there's no dung beetles in their poop
Interesting.
because
Okay.
that passes through their poop,
Yep.
and the insects won't have anything to do with their poop when I treat
Yeah.
them.
Well, that's what that flea and tick is there for, a purpose to get those bugs out of there. So I guess
Yeah.
it does a good job.
Yeah.
So interesting. Okay, so there's rollers in the area. So go look at your dog poo. Apparently, you might find some rollers. I have yet to see any rollers, but I've seen tunnelers and dwellers. So dwellers, as their name says, they dwell within the manure pat. So cow makes a deposit on the field, and the dwellers. All dung beetles smell very well, and they have wings and they can fly. So they fly in, make residency on their dung pat, and the dwellers kind of just live within the dung pat itself. They don't tunnel too much down too deeply into the soil. They might an inch or 2, but usually their whole life cycle is within that dung pat. So they find a mate, and they lay eggs, and those larvae, or those eggs hatch into larvae, pupate, and then turn into adult dung beetles. So that life cycle continues and continues. Certain dung beetles have a couple week long life cycle, some couple years. So it just depends on the species. Tunnelers, on the other hand, same type of thing. Smell dung, come on in, splat right into it, and pair up. And they start to tunnel either directly below the dung pat or kind of off to the sides a little bit. If you've ever seen your dung pat with little mounds of dirt on the edges, that's a really good sign that you probably have some tunnelers. And so these guys will pair up and form a little tunnel. And one thing, if you look at these dung beetles as you're passing them around, I don't know where they went. They've got on their legs, they call it a tibia spear, or tibia teeth, which a lot of dung beetles have, and that's one really good way to identify if it's a dung beetle instead of just a regular beetle, is they kind of have these really sharp, jagged forearms almost that help them tunnel and dig and go through the poo. And so anyways, two tunnelers join forces in a dung pat, dig a little tunnel, and essentially the female dung beetle will kind of like hang out in the tunnel, and then the male dung beetle will go out into the poo and bring her little gifts of poo back. And so shulks up the gifts of poo and put them in the tunnel and lay her eggs in those. And then the eggs will hatch, eat the poo ball, and pupate and form to an adult dung beetle and go again. So one thing they did find with the tunnelers, though, some of them actually hang out. The parents will hang out to wait till the eggs hatch, turn into adults to make sure that their babies are kind of doing their thing and being good. So they didn't know that about dung beetles before, which is kind of cool. And then rollers, obviously, those are the ones I think we know most about because it's a very visually interesting sight to see, I'm sure. And that only actually encompasses about 10% of the dung beetles are the rollers, and they form a ball and tunnel it down to the ground, essentially lay eggs in that and move forward. So why are dung beetles important? I'll just wrap up here. Dung beetles are important for a lot of reasons, but the main ones, number one, fertilizing your fields. I think that's kind of obvious. A lot of the dung that they put into the soils, about 40-50% actually never gets eaten by the larvae, and so either earthworms will eat it or other soil life will eat it in the meantime and return that back to the soil. So that's a lot of manure that's going directly into our soils. Some dung beetles can bury up to 250 times their body weight into the soil a day. So that's pretty substantial when you start thinking about the thousands and thousands of beetles that you hopefully have on your pasture. So they do a great job of putting that into the soils. And for me personally, I have it in my head that when a cow makes a deposit, unless that manure is incorporated into your soil somehow, it's either going to volatilize or it's going to wash away. And so, again, nitrogen is always wanting to volatilize. It always wants to get back to its gaseous state. So a lot of that nitrogen that's in our manure does not get captured, does not get utilized because it's kind of it's disappearing essentially. So if you have dung beetles that can essentially bury a dung pat in a week's time, that's a lot of fertilizer that you're getting into your soils. And essentially all you have to do is just not kill them. So it's not like you have to do any extra work. It's passive income.
What kills them?
What kills them?
Medicated.
Well, we've had a decline in dung beetles the last couple of decades because of a lot of the biocides, the fly control that passes through the cows, and it usually ends up killing like the larvae that hatch from the eggs. It's not usually the adult dung beetles. It's more like the larvae, because the larvae is actually what's eating the dung balls that are buried or whatnot. The adult dung beetles usually only eat like the slurry part of the manure. And with that being said, if you research dung beetles with Australia and New Zealand, they've got some really interesting research going on now because they actually just introduced foreign dung beetles to their country the last couple of decades. Like I said, dung beetles are species specific, and